Perfect.
There
Are
we
you
go.
okay, James, to do an introduction for yourself, or do you want me to do it for you?
Yeah, I've got a slide about myself, so I'm happy.
Perfect. All right, I will be quiet and sit here in the background.
Thank you, Jenny. So I guess welcome everyone, particularly to those who are watching on catch up as well. I've got a link to my Instagram page there, but my phone number and my email is going to be on the last slide. So if anyone's got any specific questions that they want that aren't live, please feel free to get in touch via those. But my name's James Stanbury. I'm here as a performance nutritionist to run through a number of, I've just got someone to let in. There you go. Welcome, Suzanne. So got a series of nutrition education sessions that should hopefully help you continue to progress. And on the next slide should be the introduction to myself. So I won't spend too much time on this, it's just the boring stuff, but it's to try and give a little bit of confidence that I do know what I'm on about when it comes to nutrition. So I've done undergraduate and postgraduate degrees in sports nutrition. I'm accredited by Sport and Exercise Nutrition Register, which is kind of the, I guess, governing body to some extent of performance nutritionists. And I work as a lecturer, sport and exercise nutrition, and manage a nutrition degree at Hartpury University. And then I work with Amplify, my company, just doing all sorts of applied stuff with sports nutrition. My background is very varied, I'd say. I've worked from your typical football and rugby to extreme sports, including motorsport, cross-country skiing, marathon running, some equine stuff as well. So as you'll see today, the principles of sports nutrition are transferable across all contexts. So the aim of today, oh, and I forgot to say, also accredited with UK anti-doping. So if anyone is open to batch or dope testing or anything like that, give me a shout and we can talk through those parts. But today is very much just to give you an introduction to nutrition, kind of generate a little bit of what I call buy-in. So we're going to talk about why nutrition is so important, why we should actually even care about it in the first place. We'll then start looking at energy balance and, I guess in modern terms, calorie deficits and stuff like that. And we'll talk a little bit on tracking. And I think that will give us plenty to go over in this session. So the first thing is what actually is sports nutrition. I'll work through this and I'll go through some of my philosophies and my approaches as we work through the slides, because I have a bit of a niche view on some of these areas. But sports nutrition in my eyes is just the application of knowledge, and it's going to be very big on the application. Whilst these seminars are going to be educational, I'll be trying to give you things that you can go away and do after each session and actually put into practice. You'll see there it says about a practical daily eating plan, but I wouldn't take that plan as kind of this typical rigid approach to sports nutrition. Things shouldn't be rigid. It's not a plan as in everything has to be written down and clearly defined. It's just putting it into a daily regime that you can actually utilize. So some of the foundational pillars and things that we'll look to in coming sessions are going to be around fueling. So fueling for training, fueling for competition. How can we ensure that we're having the right preparation? So is physical preparation and your training is really important, but your nutrition needs to go hand in hand with that. You've then also got repair, so growth and repair. Whenever you do any form of exercise, you're putting your body under some stress and you're going to cause yourself some damage. So it's therefore important that we put ourselves in the best position to repair after that. That's not just exercise. It can be any demanding work like yard work, but it can also be gym sessions, runs, and any competition or rides that you're doing. One of the kind of primary drivers is going to be this element of performance. So optimizing your athletic performance in competitive events. So you've got performance in your training, but performance in whatever specific event or events, if it's multiple, that you're competing in. And we'll dive into those kind of preparation and recovery basis on future seminars. But today's very much that foundational element. The other point that I try to pull through my approach as much as I can is this idea of health and wellness. And I think we can all probably view ourselves more of an athlete than we give ourselves credit to. I just view an athlete as anyone that moves. There's benefits there to be had, but health and wellness, looking after all your structures, bone health, muscular health, but beyond just the physical and physiological health. We've got this idea come through in the last couple of years a lot more just as a societal thing, but mental well-being, social well-being, and nutrition's tied closely to that. So nutrition should never be sacrificing any of this mental well-being to try and chase physical demands. In my belief, they go hand in hand. They both support one another. And you might be looking at this right now, maybe that you are what you'd view as an elite athlete, maybe you're more of a recreational athlete. A lot of people struggle to call themselves athlete because we kind of view it with the people you might see on TV or the people who are famous. But the foundational principles of sports nutrition are applicable to everyone. So anyone who gets up and moves, if you go and do a bit of training, view yourself as an athlete, and these sports nutrition principles will help you with all of the things that are listed on the page. So it's still going to keep going on the next slide. It's going to be a bit of a summary of that. So general health, the physiological, your body, your muscles, your bones, your growth and repair, but also this cognitive side, how you experience your body psychologically, how you experience your relationship with food. All of that is linked to your approaches around nutrition. And I think all of us has areas in which we can find some benefit in some of those relationships. And good nutrition doesn't sacrifice that. Good nutrition doesn't ruin your relationship with food, and it doesn't ruin the way you experience your own body. The idea on fueling, and this I think is for people who have got long training, demanding job roles maybe, or maybe long competition and or competitions of multiple. So if you're back to back riding different horses or competing in different events, we know that the more exercise we do, the more tired we get. But if we're fueling correctly, we can ensure that we're maintaining the quality of our performance. And I think we often spend a lot of time looking at what the right things to be feeding the horses, but what about the riders? And I think the equine industry perhaps has historically underplayed nutrition. And just because some people have made it to the top without paying much attention to nutrition doesn't mean that there's not further benefit there that can be had. So a big one that we'll talk about in coming sessions is around, I guess, amplifying adaptation. So if you're going to go and do a training session, it's normally targeted around a goal. A simple one is, if you want to build muscle mass, you're going to go and lift weights. But after you've done that, your nutritional approach can really maximize that adaptation and increase your progress. An important one that I think we can all probably relate to, and I won't talk too much about immunity, especially because of the last 2 years we've had, is this piece on reduction of injury and illness. We typically see with people who are under fueling, so perhaps not consuming enough or not consuming the right foods, that you're more likely to pick up injuries, you're more likely to fall ill as well. And I think when you factor that across, if you take 12 months, you take your full year, if you're losing days through injury and you're losing days through illness, they're all days that are going to dent your progression. So if we can minimize the amount of time we spend injured and ill, but also we can enhance our recovery times. So if you pick up a cold, perhaps if you're consuming the right foods and you've got a healthy approach, that it will be less time before you're able to train again. So reducing the amount of days you spend away from training and competition is only going to be beneficial for your progression. And the final point on here, which is where we'll start looking into a little bit more depth, is this piece on body composition. So yes, we can change and manipulate your weight. Can't say we can change your height, but particularly on the body composition pieces, looking at those ratios of fat mass to muscle mass. And I think that's often where people's goals around nutrition come from. But I think usually people will have 3 different groupings of goals. You'll normally have a performance goal of something you want to get out of your direct performance or training, a body composition goal. Now this goal might just be to maintain where you are. You might be happy with where you are and just want to maintain that, but it's often one of increase muscle mass, reduce fat mass, or try and do both. And nutrition can help with that. So before we jump into calories, this is foundational to my approaches in sports nutrition. This is what I call the nutrition pyramid. And these, well, you could call them my pillars. And you'll see that the seminar series is going to follow this through. But to talk through it really quickly, at the bottom, you've got energy balance. This is calories in, calories out. That's foundational. First and foremost, you want to get that right. You've then got your macronutrient intakes, which I'll introduce today, but we'll do more in the next session around carbs, protein, and fat. You've then got vitamins and minerals. We can then, once those things are in the correct amounts, look at how we change the timing. When are we eating? When are we drinking? Particularly in relation to exercise, to training, to competition. And again, they'll come through in future sessions. And then the cherry on the top should be the supplements, or could be the supplements. Don't have to have supplements, but sometimes they can just give an added ergogenic benefit. However, I think a view that I have on the industry, the nutrition industry, is that supplements are easy to market and companies can make big money. So often we see people that have this top-down approach of supplements are the most important thing and everything else falls to the wayside. It's very much got to be this bottom-up approach. And then to bring it all together is this point on behavior and lifestyle, and that behavior and lifestyle informs all of this. So I will say very clearly now, please do not leave any of these sessions going, right, I'm going to start everything from scratch. I'm going to push all what I'm currently doing to the side, and I'm going to start from scratch with a new diet. Likelihood is that won't work. It's not sustainable. And you might be able to relate. You might have done diets in the past and they might last 3 or 4 weeks. You might even get a few months out of it, but eventually you fall back into old routines. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Before we go through nutrition stuff, consider what you're currently doing does have some good stuff in there. Now, you might struggle to find what those bits are, but I promise you there are some good things in there. For starters, what you're currently doing probably works for your budget. It works for your timings because you're finding the time to eat at those times. Probably works for your preference, probably works for your cooking or your current cooking skills, probably works for your current nutritional knowledge. So there's lots of different things that are working for a reason. So don't try and scrap that. What we want to do is view what we're currently doing as a framework and begin to build on that. Make a few swaps, add a few things in, and just week by week, gradually make small changes. And I say, if you just change 1 or 2 things every week for a year, in 12 months' time, you've made over 100 changes to your nutritional strategy, which is massive. Whereas if you try and make 100 changes in 1 day, probably not going to stick. So that's the preface to then energy balance. And this, again, might be clearing up a little bit of BS that's out there in the nutrition industry. If you want to manipulate your weight, and that can be weight gain, it can be weight loss. It might be that you're happy with where you are and you just want to make sure that you're maintaining at your current weight. It really does come down to the simple equation of energy balance, the calories you consume versus the calories that you expend or burn. And that's not just through exercise. So the next slide is going to get a little bit sciencey, but we can kind of skip over the science, but if it doesn't resonate with you. What you've got here is a figure. The values don't matter. The words don't really matter, but it's just showing how the approach is kind of underpinned by the science. These are the components that make up your energy expenditure. So all of the calories you burn during a day are made up by these 4 components. You've got basal metabolic rate, BMR. You might sometimes hear a similar one of resting metabolic rate. This is basically the calories that you burn at rest. If you're just bedbound for the day, that's how many calories you'd use. Despite what different pills and different magazines might say, you're not really going to be able to do much to change that, other than maybe building some muscle mass. But we don't need to change that. That is what it is. You've then got the point at the top, which we kind of call EAT or EAT. This is your exercise activity. So any planned physical exercise, a gym session or a run falls under that component at the top. But I think what's important here is to highlight, you're probably lucky if that accounts for 10 to 15% of your overall expenditure. I think we often see people spending a lot of time figuring, right, I've got an hour, how can I burn the most amount of calories in that hour? it's not going to make much difference. You can make some changes, but I think there's places elsewhere that we'll move on to that you can make bigger changes. Again, thermic effect of food might be buzzwords that you've heard before. All that means is that we consume carbs, protein, fat. We need to use a little bit of energy to harness the energy from it. Protein uses a few more calories to digest and absorb. Another reason that we'll see protein's probably something you want in moderate to high amounts. But other than that, you don't need to worry about it. So I've gone through 3 of the 4 things and said, don't really worry about it. So I'm not going to do it on the last one of NEAT. This is kind of the non-exercise stuff. And I think this is where we can make some important lifestyle changes if you're wanting to lose weight. I think you look particularly over the last 20, 30 years, technology is a big driver of making our lives easier. Everything that we do, technology comes along to try and make it easier. And gradually, I think some people's activity starts to drop off. Again, it depends what you do for work, depends what you do during the day. If you're working on the yard, you're going to have pretty massive output. But just think across the day, what can you do differently? Why do we take elevators and escalators? Can you take the stairs? Why do we try so hard to park our car as close to the shop as possible, and we'll cram it into a space where you know someone's going to put a dent in your car? Can you not just park down the far end of the car park and get the step count up, carry your bags back? Those small little changes throughout a day can make a really big difference. So I think if you're going to look at your energy expenditure, a good way to, if you want to increase that, is looking at your lifestyle. Can you do meetings at work while walking? Do you want to start having some step counts that you try and hit? So the main take home from this is, despite what you might read, you're not changing your BMR, and your biggest change can come through that NEAT point. And I should have probably said to preface the session, if anyone's got any questions as we're going along, feel free to use the chat function or just unmute yourself. But at the end of the session, I'll leave plenty of time for some questions. So in relation to food now, really quickly, the principle is this: if you eat more than you're burning, you gain weight. If you eat the same amount as you're burning, you'll maintain your weight. And last but not least, if you consume less than you're burning, then you will lose weight. We'll come on to tracking, but tracking, calculating all your calories, all of that can be great. But the primary driver is going to tell you if you're in a deficit or a surplus or equilibrium will be what your weight's doing. The other thing to consider, maybe you're in a deficit Monday to Thursday, but if Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you're then back in a surplus. If over a week you're leveled out, you won't lose weight. So try and look at it on a weekly basis, not just on that day-to-day piece. Now, for those of you that are thinking about different diets that you've heard of or done in the past, some of you might swear by these that are up here. That's fine. If that's your approach, that's your approach. I'm not going to argue with you. But whilst they all have some magic pill reason of why they're the best thing in the world and they're going to help you lose weight or gain weight or whatever you want to do, the fundamental principle is, if you lose weight on a certain diet, it's because you've put yourself in a calorie deficit. Sometimes, or pretty much all of the things on there will do that through restricting food. My job and my approach is never going to be to sit here and say, you cannot eat this and you cannot eat this. So if you don't want to exclude any foods, don't exclude any foods. Every single food can have a place in your diet. You just need to be aware of calorie contents and how that's impacting your day-to-day basis. If you want to restrict foods, you can go for it. But I sort of think if you're enjoying a certain food group, I'm putting it in your diet. So I think have the same approach. You can put yourself in a deficit in many different ways. It doesn't have to be through restriction. So the next point that I think comes logically off the back of that is around how can you actually figure out how many calories you need, which is what I'll go through here. First and foremost, I cannot tell anyone to the nearest calorie how many calories you need. We don't know. We don't have that level of accuracy. So every single recommendation that you get is an estimate. So don't get too obsessed with it. Some estimates are better than others. And I think if you want to figure out how many calories you should have, you can use an app, use a calculator. There's different equations that you can use, but it's all an estimate, and just get yourself a ballpark figure if you're wanting to go down this route of looking at your calories. If you're wanting to lose weight, if you're using an app, pop in there that you want to lose weight and it will take a few calories off to give you that deficit. If you want to gain weight, tell it all you want to gain weight and it will put some more on. It's really basic in that regard. I think if you're just trying to plug in a deficit or a surplus, I say aim for small but sustainable. So don't go for the world's biggest deficit. Don't put yourself on 1,000 calories or something like that if you don't need to. Just give yourself 200 calorie deficit and see if you can stick to that. But the biggest take home on this is that it is an estimate, and whatever the estimates say, at the end of the day, what your weight doing, or what your weight is doing, that's better English, is going to be your greatest indicator of what your calorie balance looks like. Just one piece on weighing yourself, and just because I've had good feedback from people before, please do not weigh yourself every day. You do not need to weigh yourself every day. We have lots of fluctuations. Maybe if you like to have that little bit of control, drop yourself twice a week, once a week, and just monitor that weight over time. And the reality is, as you can see on this little figure on the right-hand side, you'll have some weeks where it comes down and you'll have some weeks where it rebounds. Don't tie your emotions to your scale weight. Just focus on a long-term trend, which is more important than these changes. And if you're going to weigh yourself, do it first thing in the morning. As soon as you wake up, get on the scale and log it. If you do it during the day, there's far too many variables. On the flip side of that, just as part of the approach, if you don't want to weigh yourself, don't weigh yourself. There's other indicators. You can use belt sizes. Do certain clothes fit or do they not fit? Pictures of yourself. You can take pictures, save them, and then take pictures in a month's time, and you can look visually. Or if it's just something that you don't resonate with and you sometimes have negative emotions tied to this tracking thing, just don't do it. Just go off of subjectively. I'm training well, I'm competing well, I'm feeling well. That's just as important as your weight, if not more important. So whilst we're on the topic of weighing and doing calorie counting, question often comes up around tracking and should you track? And my cop-out answer is it's completely up to you. But I think to give a little bit more information, I think there's just so much out there we can track now. Blood pressures, heart rates, step counts, your weight, different blood measures, skin folds, calorie intakes. But I sort of think only, in my opinion anyway, feel free to disagree, only track things if it's actually going to make a difference. If you're going to track something and get some data and then change how you're training or how you're eating, then that can be good. But if you're just going to track something, look at it and go, I haven't hit this target, or it's higher or lower than I thought, now I feel like crap and I'm not going to do anything about it, I sort of think, what's the point in tracking that? So yes, we've got smartwatches, we've got lots of stuff available, but if you want to track anything, be selective. To make it a little bit more specific to nutrition, I am on the fence with tracking. I think tracking can be a useful tool, but I think it should be a tool and not a lifestyle, in my opinion. Go and track for a couple of days and just see if you can get a target of where your diet is. If you want to track every day, again, feel free to track every day, but it's not really my approach because I don't think it's that necessary. So view tracking as a tool of any data, view it as a tool. And I think just consider your relationship with it. And is it helping you progress, or is it just making you feel like crap? And then the final couple of slides, I'm aware I've been rambling for a little bit, so I'll open it up for questions. Really quickly ahead of the next session that we have is just to introduce carbs, protein, and fat. So carbohydrates, again, we've heard carbs are bad for you, we've heard fat's bad for you, everything's bad for you apparently. or on the flip side, nothing's bad for you if it's in moderation, and that's just fundamental to it. My belief, and I guess it's more the scientific literature than a belief, is that as an athlete, as anyone who's doing any moderate to high intensity exercise, carbohydrates are your primary energy source. So in your diet, you should be having breads, potatoes, grains, different fruit and veg are high in carbs as well. So feel free to include those. The idea that you have to exclude bread and potatoes, you might have read in magazines or on the news, it's a lie. You don't need to. It's more about the amount of it and what your total calories are doing, as per the previous slides. The other thing is carbs taste great, so have them. And there's a point on there in sparing protein, which we'll come on to. But protein itself, again, the image is showing you a few sources where you might find it in the diet. I think most people know protein's main role in exercise and training is around muscular growth. It's got a role in immunity as well, hormones, enzymes. So it's got a wide variety of roles. But it's this point of carbohydrates spare protein. So if you're not having enough carbs, you might begin using protein as an energy source, but you want protein to be refueling or rebuilding your muscles. Doesn't matter whether your protein's from vegan, vegetarian, or meat-based sources, you can sustain athletic performance and adaptation on any of those diets and any of those protein sources. Whilst I tend to get people away from social media and the internet, I think the one thing internet can be good for is just looking up some different protein sources and different meal ideas. So I think that's a great starting point. And that's not me fobbing you off. That's just me being aware that I'm a bit time bound and don't want to rant about protein for too long. But top tip on this one that I think you can take away and start trying to do is, we have this notion of 5 portions of fruit and veg a day, but I think looking at 4 to 5 portions of protein spread out through the day can be really good. Typically in a Western diet, we have all our protein at the final meal, but can we have some protein breakfast, lunch, dinner, where you are in the country, if you want to call it breakfast, lunch, tea, whatever you want. 3 meals if you're going for a typical 3 meal, and then maybe 2 snacks in there that have moderate to high protein. So that can be eggs, tuna, baby bells, Jenny will vouch for this one, protein yogurts. We sit there and work with those all the time. But particularly if you're on this weight loss element, protein is satiating. It's just a fancy word for saying it fills you up. So moderate to high protein fills you up, has high thermic effect of food. So you actually use a few calories to try and break down protein. And if you're in a deficit, your body will try to use some muscle for energy, or use protein for energy. So it will just support the preservation of your muscle mass during a deficit. So protein is great, and you want that in the diet. And I think it's just something to reflect on. Look at your day planning. Are you getting 4 portions of protein in there? Last but not least, fats. Fat is good. Fat does not make you fat. Total calories, if it's in a surplus, makes you fat. Fats do not make you fat. You use fat for energy when you're at rest. It's got really important links to brain health and brain function. So including fats through lots of different sources, dairy, fish, nuts, eggs are great sources to have in there. So I think as a summary for today's session, fundamentally, if you're wanting to shift weight up or down, energy balance is most important. And in the next session, I can talk a little bit more about how you can put yourself in a deficit if you want, or in a surplus. Consider how and what you're tracking and whether you want to track some weights or go and track your food for a couple of days. And then there's just an introduction to carbs, protein, and fat, which will lead in nicely to the next session. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking and I'll open it up. If anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask them now. My email, phone number, my Instagram page are up there. And I, as always, just welcome any questions if anyone's watching on catch up or live through those avenues as well. So that's everything from me. Thank you for listening, and I'll welcome any questions that you have. Feel free to unmute or use the chat function if you wish.
Hello, can you hear me, James?
Yes, I can. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. So whilst the others are thinking about whether they're going to ask a question or not, just an observation that I had, especially over the last couple of years, it's not really related to my performance, but it's definitely related to that energy balance piece, and the NEAT is something that I definitely have not accounted for how much NEAT I have lost.
Yeah.
Through working from home. And I know some of you guys will work on yards, and I know I have clients with massively different ends of the spectrum. I have some people that ride and have office jobs, and I have other clients that literally riding and working on the yard all day, so that it's the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But I know for me, like, I actually exercise quite a lot. I don't even know how much, but probably like, I don't know, 9 to 12 hours a week, which isn't masses, but it's masses compared to some. And for me, having the walking around the office and stuff was massive to me. So I think that's probably one of the points I took on a lot to think about. And exercise snacking is something I've been posting about on my socials recently. And maybe step count is never something I've thought about before, purely because I do quite a bit of exercise. But since I've been working from home more and really not moving, it's something that I've had to actually consider, because otherwise I might be on 4,000 steps a day, which is really, really quite terrible.
100%. I've got a question from Jen.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on protein bars for the protein snacks through the day, on how they stack up from a calorie density to protein ratio? Yeah, so that's something that will come through on the next session. The calorie density ratio, I think, is a really good way of putting it. It's just dependent upon the specific protein bar. So I think the problem with a lot of protein bars is they're also full of a lot of fat and carbs half the time. So you might get about 15 to 20 grams of protein, but you might be getting a bit of a poor calorie budget for that. Whereas I think things such as tins of tuna, eggs, the protein yogurts tend to be a bit more of a better ratio. You've got things like Baby Bell Lights as well that are good there. There are certainly some good protein bars on the market. I think if you look at some of the typical like grenade bars and stuff like that, they're often very high in calories. So I think it's just on an individual level, just checking the labels of certain things to just see if you're getting about 10 to 20 grams of protein. And I think it would be about 150 to 200 calories. Then I think you're in a good area for your protein trade-off there. But it's just sometimes they're dressed up in fancy packaging, but they're all actually just full of all sorts of sugar as well. So hopefully that answers the question. Perfect. Thank you, Jess.
Yeah. They do market those, don't they? That's a good point. I'm sure you're going to come on to it next week. But I had a protein cookie once, and I went around for ages thinking it's 150. This is quite a long time ago. But I was like, oh, I'm being so good. This is 150 calories. And then when I had a look again, I was like, oh, that's per serving. They had a serving as half the calorie, half the cookie when you actually check, and you're like, oh dear.
Yeah.
I think there might be another one. Let's have a look. No, that was all Jess. Anyone else got any questions before James heads off? I think you might be saved there, James.
Yes, that's all good with me. And I will say, if there's any questions, feel free to send through as well, and I can integrate them into future sessions. Perfect. I will stop recording.
Thank you